We have Phillip Pattison here, Executive Director and one of the founders of Foster the City, a longtime friend of Current. He said he's a three-peater here this morning. We've had him out here many times, actually, in each of the spaces that we've been in. So we can't wait to hear what God's put on your heart, Phillip.
Awesome.
Yeah, welcome. Let's give him
Cindy.
a warm welcome.
Thank you, Cindy. Current, it's so good to be with you all. Yeah, Cindy said I'm a three-timer. I'm part of the three-timer club. So it's really good to be back. It's so fun to see, again, just the way God is growing and moving in this church community. I've really been looking forward to joining you all. As Cindy said, my name is Phillip. I lead Foster the City. I'm stoked to be here to share a message that I think is really near to the heart of God. Maybe the best way that I can do that is just to jump in with a story. Let me tell you about a beautiful little girl. Sadly, this little girl, when she was born, she had a positive toxicology report, which simply means when she was born, she had drugs surging through her little body. So within hours, she was placed into the foster care system. By the time she was 2.5 months old, she had already been cared for by 4 different moms. If you look at the stats, the outlook on that little girl's future is probably pretty bleak. We know for kids that come into the foster care system, if they age out without getting placed into a loving, stable home, about a third will spend time on the streets. About half will develop a substance addiction. More than half develop PTSD. Suicidal tendencies for kids in foster care are 4 times higher than their peers. Like, I could keep going, but my point is just like this little girl today, world of statistics fighting up against her. My wife and I heard about this little one's story years ago. And we just said, man, if there's anything that we can do to maybe help shift that trajectory for her, like we want to be a part of her story. And so we ended up bringing this little girl into our home, and we became her foster parents. And we got to foster her for 4 years. Her story was a little bit different than the kids we'd fostered in the past. So the kids we'd fostered before all had the chance to go back home to be with their biological parents. Like, if you're not familiar with foster care, that's the goal, whenever possible, is to see families, kind of reunified, restored back together, stronger, healthier than ever. As Christians, we love it. We have a God who loves to see things that were once broken made whole, don't we? Right? And so we're called to actually join him in that. We're called to be agents of reconciliation, is what the New Testament says. We're to be ministers of reconciliation. We get to partner with God in helping to see things restored and reconciled. So we love that part about foster care, seeing families come together healthier than before. We were told, though, by the social workers, the judge, the lawyers, that wasn't going to be possible for this little girl. And so after 4 years, we moved from being her foster family to her forever family, and we got to adopt her. We have a quick picture. This is us here. That's her right there, the little one there. Isn't she cute? Yeah, you can. Can I tell you one more quick story about her? So my wife there, who's next to me, we've been married for, next month will be 21 years. It's crazy. You don't have to clap. This means I'm old. But when we were 4 kids, like when we were first married, we had all kinds of time on our hands. And so one of the things we would do together, at nighttime, we would read book series together. We'd read books out loud. And one of the book series that we read was called The Chronicles of Narnia. Are you familiar with Narnia? Okay, if you're not, Narnia initially centers around 4 kids, 2 brothers, 2 sisters. You got Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. Peter, Susan, Edmund, Lucy. And we were like, because we were just kind of chatting, like, that's a great amount of kids to have 2 boys, 2 girls. You can't really control that kind of thing, right? But we were just kind of dreaming, and as chances would have it, as we started to have biological kids, we ended up having boy, girl, boy. We had our Peter, we had our Susan, we had our Edmund. We didn't name them that, okay? We're not that into Narnia. But we had our Peter, Susan. We was missing our Lucy. We were just missing our Lucy. And so for years, even kind of into our foster care journey, we would even say, God, if there's ever a little girl that needs a forever home, like, open hands, we're here. We'd love to welcome in a Lucy. My older daughter here, she even had a little doll when she was young. It was kind of our proxy. She called it Lucy. And so we would just pray over these. God, bring us our Lucy. One day, if there's a little girl that needs a forever family, bring us our Lucy. And so one day, I got a phone call from my wife, and she said, hey, Phillip, I got a call from the county. And they said, there's a little girl that needs a home. They want us to go down to the county building to learn about her. Would you meet me after work? So I did. I drove down after work to the county building. She met me outside, and before we even walked in, she grabbed me, and she's like, Phillip, guess what her name is? Her name is Lucy. And that's the little girl that needed a forever family. I have wondered over the years, like, why would God allow us to actually welcome in a girl, a Lucy? Like, not just, this is the little girl we literally prayed for by name for years. Is it just that he wants, like, to reinforce that he hears our prayers? Probably. But it's been reminding me of something else recently, too. It's been reminding me that little girl, that her name matters. She is not just one of the thousands of kids in the foster care system here in the Bay. She's Lucy. Her name matters. She's not just one of the, she is not a nameless number. And that's true of every single kid in the foster care system, isn't it? They're not just stats. Like, they're kids with names. Like, every number has a name. Every name has a story. Every story matters to God. And because their stories matter to God, their stories matter to us, don't they? Now, that's why we started Foster the City. It's been about 9 years now, 9.5 years. We started Foster the City. It's a movement of churches just like Current that care deeply for vulnerable kids in our community. We found out 9 years ago that there were more children entering into the foster care system in the Bay Area than there are families that were ready to welcome them in. And it broke our heart, and we knew that the church has a role and an obligation and an opportunity to change that. And so we started rallying churches and meeting with leaders like David and Cindy and kind of linking arms together and saying, hey, what if we were to raise up foster families and then raise up support teams for foster families, and let's keep doing it until there's more than enough to meet the need? What if we get to this place where there's like a waiting list of families rather than a waiting list of kids in need of a home? Today, by the grace of God, what started with just a handful of churches, Current being one of them, today is over 300 churches that have linked arms together. I think, if memory's correct, I think 317 churches that are saying we're going to keep going until there's more than enough. We want to get to that place where there's a waiting list of families, and we want to see the church on the front lines to make that happen. Because the church, over the last 2,000 years, has been at its best when it has been a community that moves towards the vulnerable. The church at its best is a community that moves with hospitality and healing and hope and compassion towards those who matter so much to the heart of God. So that's what I want to talk about today. That was my intro. I'll speed up, I promise. To frame our conversation about how we can be that kind of community, a community that moves towards the vulnerable, I want to look for a few minutes at Romans chapter 12. We only have time to look at a few verses, but this week, I'll give you some quick homework. Read Romans 12, 9 through 21. Paul paints this incredible picture of who the church could be and who the church, the picture that God has for his people. Romans 12, 9 through 21. We don't have time to look at all those verses today. We're just going to look for a handful of verses in there, but I believe that what I'm about to read and kind of Romans 12 in general is God's heart for Current. But let's start in verse 11 together. This is what the Apostle Paul says. He says, do not be slothful in zeal, but be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation, and be constant in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice, and weep with those who weep. And we'll stop there for the day. When I was praying through this passage, I wrote down a few things. If we want to be a community, as a people of God that brings hope and compassion to the vulnerable, there needs to be a few things that are true about us. We need to be a people with open hands, soft hearts, and hard feet. Open hands, soft hearts, and hard feet. We'll take those one at a time. Verse 13 again says, contribute to the needs of the saints, seek to show hospitality. Open hands, seek to show hospitality. One of the best books that I read this last year was a book called Unreasonable Hospitality. It's by a guy named Will Guidar. Anybody get a chance to read that one this year? Okay, I highly recommend it. It's a good one. So Will was the general manager of 11 Madison Park, this restaurant in New York City. And he tells, in this book, he tells the story of how 11 Madison Park went from being a pretty good restaurant in New York to being a 3 Michelin star ranked #1 restaurant in the world. And as you can imagine, just from the title of the book, Unreasonable Hospitality, it wasn't just because of the world-class food. It was because of this irrational, over-the-top, unreasonable hospitality. He said it all started this one day when he was bussing a table in the restaurant, and he overheard a conversation behind him. There was a table full of out-of-town guests, and they were having this conversation. They'd visited all of these great fine dining restaurants in New York, and they were just wrapping up their trip, and he overheard one of the guys say, out of all the great restaurant experiences we've had, there's just one thing I didn't get to do, one thing I didn't get to try. I never got to try one of those famous New York City street hot dogs. And so Will got this idea, and he slipped out of the restaurant, ran down to the corner, bought a $2 hot dog from the vendor, ran back to his world-class chef, and said, would you please plate this? And so he cut it up and drizzled mustard over it in this fancy way and put some little sauerkraut on the side, and he brought it back out to the man, and he said, hey, listen, I would hate for you to leave New York City without a complete culinary experience. And then he slipped the hot dog in front of him. He said the guy was just blown away. He said that out of all of the dining experiences that he'd had in New York on that trip, he said that $2 experience was the best. And Will began to realize the power of seeing and hearing and caring about the people who are right in front of you. And so from that point forward, they just kind of made it their mission to create all of these incredible moments of hospitality for every guest that walked through their door. Will actually began his book like this. He said, most of the chefs on the 50 best list had made their impact by focusing on innovation, on what needed to change. But as I thought about the impact that I wanted to make, I focused on the one thing that wouldn't. Fads fade and cycle, but the human desire to be taken care of never goes away. You hear that? The human desire to be taken care of never goes away. Dr. Kurt Thompson, he's one of the leading voices and kind of thought leaders around attachment theory. He said it like this. He said, we all were born into this world looking for someone looking back at us. We all were born into this world looking for someone looking back at us. And we remain in this mode of searching for the rest of our lives. For somebody to see you and care about you, who knows you, who thinks about you, who prays for you, who works to meet your needs and your desires. Isn't that beautiful? But this hospitality that we have a picture of at 11 Madison Park, that's beautiful and all. But I mean, the hospitality to which Paul is calling you and me and Jesus is inviting you and me into goes so much deeper than that. When the hospitality at 11 Madison Park, that's for the wealthy. You pay hundreds of dollars, maybe thousands of dollars to have a once-in-a-lifetime experience of hospitality like that at a fine dining restaurant. Look what Jesus has to say, though, about hospitality. He says, when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. In fact, the word hospitality itself actually comes from the Greek word philoxenia. I'm sure I'm butchering it, but whatever. Philoxenia, it's a compound word, I know that much. Philo means friend. Xenia means foreigner. Hospitality literally means friend to the foreigner. Friend to the outsider. A friend to the downtrodden, friend to the marginalized. Skye Jethani, in his book, The Divine Commodity, he writes this. He says, the English word hospitality originates from the same Latin root as the word hospital. A hospital is literally a home for strangers. That's what the word means, a home for strangers. Of course, it's come to mean a place of healing. Listen to this. There is a link between being welcomed and being healed. Our homes are to be hospitals. Our dinner tables are to be operating tables, the place where broken souls are made whole again. I love that our dinner tables are to be operating tables. I think it was 3 weeks ago, I was talking with a guy. He was a former Navy officer, and he said, Phillip, did you know that the dining room where the officers eat their meals is called the ward room, as in W-A-R-D, like a hospital ward. It's called the ward room. He said, you know why? He said, because in times of crisis, the dining table becomes the operating table. It doesn't sound sanitary in the slightest, but it is to use that table interchangeably between cutting someone open and eating. But it is beautiful. It is beautiful. Our dining tables are to be operating tables. Our homes are to be hospitals. And you and I are invited to extend this kind of hospitality, to have this kind of open hands, not out of a sense of obligation or compulsion or guilt or shame. We're simply invited, if you will, to pay it forward. Because this is our story, isn't it? If you're a follower of Jesus here, this is your story. When we were in need, when we were struggling, when we were outsiders, God did not keep his distance from us. He moved towards us in the person of Jesus. And he literally laid down his life that we might be brought into family. And so when you and I open our homes and open our families to those in need, we're simply paying it forward. Joshua Jipp, he's a New Testament scholar, he said it like this. He said, the entire ministry of Jesus is appropriately captured in the phrase, divine hospitality to the stranger and the sinner. That's you and me, the stranger and the sinner. Divine hospitality to the stranger and the sinner. And now this divine hospitality that gives you and me a seat at his table and brings us hope and hospitality, compassion now flows through us and into the lives of those around us. I love the way Todd Hall puts it. He says, we are loved into a people of love. We are being loved into a people of love. How might that be true of you? How might God be leading you to open your hands to the outsider, to the downtrodden, to the marginalized? I'm just going to put it on the table today. Join us in Foster the City. Join us. You could consider learning about what it might look like for you to actually open up your home to a child who has been abused or neglected right here in your community. You could learn more about becoming a foster parent. If you're not able to do that, you could learn about what it might look like to be a support friend for a foster parent. For every foster family we raise up, we try to wrap them with at least 4 households that would be, operate as support friends or a support team. So they're bringing meals, they're babysitting, they're mowing lawns, they're showing up and picking up the dirty clothes off the front porch and cleaning it and bringing it back folded. Cleaned and folded, as I say. Don't just fold it, that's weird. Here's why we do that. Because only about 40% of foster families will keep going after their first year. It's hard to foster. It's hard to care continually for kids who have walked through some hard things. And so about 50 to 60% of foster families drop out within the first year. What changes that is if they have community support. If you have people like in Romans 12, you have people that are rejoicing with you as you rejoice and weeping with you as you weep. So maybe you could consider becoming a support friend and providing the practical and emotional and spiritual support that will help a foster family foster longer and better. If you're interested in any way, we have a table in the lobby. We'll have you fill out a little next step card, and we'll send you information about a Zoom interest meeting where you can take about an hour, and we'll kind of deep dive into those different roles. But just fill out the next step card. Author and pastor Jason Johnson said it like this. He said, we cannot rightly raise our hands in worship of a God that steps towards us in our hard and broken, and then use those same hands to push the hard and broken of others away. We're to be a people with open hands. But we're also to be a people with soft hearts and hard feet. Here's what I mean by that. Let me actually talk to just the guys here for a minute, if I could. This is going to be kind of an odd question. But guys, when was the last time you cried? When was the last time that something moved you to the point of tears? John Tyson is an author in New York. He wrote a book called Fighting Shadows. Highly recommend it for all the guys here, but he kind of lays out 7 of the most kind of common struggles that men kind of deal with in our culture today. And a lot of it came from some surveys that went out where he asked the question, what are the things that guys are wrestling with in our culture? And he said he got all kinds of answers that you typically expect, like loneliness and identity and lust and pride. He said, but he also got this entirely different category of answers that he was not expecting. You could kind of summarize it as emotional numbness and apathy. He said that the men that responded kind of noted within themselves this inability to feel. Women responded and talked about how they've been noticing a deadness in men's hearts. Does that resonate at all? He went on to write this. He called it, by the way, the male malaise. He said this. He said, life can grind a man's heart out. It can weaken and callous and wound and numb. We can just go through the motions so often that slowly our hearts shrivel, atrophy, survive. But we can also choose to position our hearts at the places where they come alive, the places of beauty and brokenness, sorrow and joy. This is why, again, Paul says in Romans 12, verse, I think it's 15, where he says, we are to rejoice with those who rejoice, and we weep with those who weep. Guys, when is the last time you wept with somebody? We have to choose to enter into the places and enter into the relationships where tears are the only appropriate response. And if we do that, if we will weep with those who weep, if we will move into the relationships where tears are the only appropriate response, this is where we find Jesus. Because Jesus wept, didn't he? Jesus was a man of tears. He wept with those who were grieving. He wept over death. He wept over a city that refused to repent and turn back to the Father. Jesus wept. Tyson goes on to write this. He says, Jesus wept is the shortest verse in the Bible. It may be the most profound. Because here is a God with sacred tears on his cheeks. Being a disciple includes asking Jesus to teach us the way of tears. Listen to this, please. Push back on the trivial distractions that rob you of your capacity to love. What are those trivial distractions for you? Is it, just entertainment and media? Is it something maybe more primal than that? Maybe is it fear? Is it an inordinate desire for comfort or career success? What is, push back on the trivial distractions that are robbing you of your capacity to love. May God have mercy on our dry eyes and may rivers of tears flow again. If you're here today and you hear conversations like this around hospitality and moving towards the vulnerable, and you're asking yourself, man, do I even have what it takes to actually make a difference in the life of someone who's struggling? Actually make a positive impact on the vulnerable in my community. Do I have what it takes? Listen, our world does not need men and women, by the way, men and women who have more swagger or more innovation or more confidence or charisma. Our world needs men and women who care. The Bay Area needs men and women who care, whose hearts are soft and tender to the things of God, who care again about those who are struggling and those who are in need. We need men and women with tears in their eyes. My oldest son was 7 when we first started our kind of foster care journey, and he told me that it was at that time that he first saw me cry. He'd never seen me cry before that. Because the first 7 years of his life, honestly, I just kind of kept much of the brokenness in our world kind of at arm's length, a lot of hard things at arm's length. A lot of that began to change in 2014 when we started our foster care training classes, and I began to hear stories that honestly I still think about a decade later. I heard stories about children who are being severely neglected in our community. I heard stories about girls who are being abused over and over and over again. I heard, again, stories about babies who are being born with drugs surging through their little veins and the first couple of months of their life just in pain as they detox. I heard stories about toddlers who were so hungry that they would put their hands down the back of their pants and eat their feces. I'm sorry for being so graphic, but what if we stop holding stories like this at arm's length? I know it's uncomfortable to hear. It's uncomfortable for me to say. It should make us sick to our stomach when we hear stories like that. Those kinds of stories should cause within us a visceral response. What if we choose to enter into the relationships where tears and visceral response is the only appropriate response? I heard stories about children who are coming into the foster care system and were living for weeks or months in the basement of an office building because they can't find families for them. Just a few weeks ago, I heard a story about a 12-year-old little girl. The social worker reached out to us and told us about her. They said that she was abandoned by her family. This is here in the Bay Area. She was abandoned by her family, and then the social worker put it like this. She said, she's done what she's had to do to survive. She's 12. My daughter is 12. She's been trafficked and sexually exploited. The most heartbreaking thing about that story to me is that the reason why the social worker was reaching out is because they can't find one family that will take in this little girl. After all the heartbreak and the tragedy that she's been through, not one family will say yes and welcome in this little girl. This is not the way it should be. We cannot call normal that which God is weeping over. Once again, we have to be a community. The church has to be known as a community that moves towards the vulnerable, that opens our hands with hospitality and compassion. We have to care. May God have mercy on our dry eyes. Jackie Pullinger, the famed missionary, she said it like this. She said, God wants us to have soft hearts and hard feet. The trouble with so many of us is that we have hard hearts and soft feet. In verse 11, Paul says, do not be slothful in zeal, but be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. That verse, fervent in spirit, literally means to boil with heat. In other words, to have a burning passion, to burn with a passion. Paul says that this burning passion should keep us from being slothful. In other words, from being lazy or inactive. In other words, to actually do something. This burning passion should cause us to move, should cause us to act, should give us hard feet. Soft hearts lead to hard feet. What does that look like for you? Let me actually just give you a quick glimpse of a family who I think embodies soft hearts and hard feet. I think we've got a video queued up. Let's go and watch this.
I want to take a minute to tell you the story of how my wife led our family into foster care. Growing up, I had no aspirations to be an adoptive dad or a foster parent. To tell you the truth, I didn't even know what foster care was. My wife, on the other hand, had decided that she was going to adopt a child before she entered middle school. I still remember the day that she came to me and she asked me, what do you think about becoming foster parents? At first, I was very hesitant about the idea. I was not interested in signing up right away to welcome children into our life from hard places. And I think one of the main reasons is I couldn't wrap my head around the concept of pouring myself out for a child only to have them leave our home. Yet after a while and her persistence, I agreed to go to an orientation to learn more about what fostering was all about. And I remember at the orientation, they shared stories and statistics of kids who were in care. Some of those statistics really cut straight to my heart. Shortly after, we found out about a 23-year-old who needed a place to stay. And my wife, yet again, convinced me that we should open up our home to this young man. As we heard his story and got to know him, we found out some heartbreaking details about his journey into foster care. When he was 14 years old, he was part of this horrific event that resulted in his entire family dying except for him. He was the only one who survived. And that event led him to enter into foster care. And the thing about his story that made me the most angry, that broke my heart the most, is that this boy at 14 years old, after going through one of the worst things I can imagine, being in foster care, there was no family available to take care of him. He ended up staying in a group home for his entire adolescence. I remember one day sitting with him. We were actually driving in the car. I know exactly the street we were on, and I asked him about why he played so many video games. And I'll never forget his answer. He said, well, I don't really like this world. And when I play video games, I'm taken to a place where nobody can hurt me. Hearing those words in that moment, all of my hesitation about becoming a foster parent melted away, and I was left sitting with a little boy who needed a home. The truth is, I'm not alone in my hesitation to become a foster dad. Many husbands are hesitant to follow their wives' calling to foster children. Addressing this issue, author and foster parent Jason Johnson says this: "Some will say it's important that both the husband and wife feel called, and I would wholeheartedly agree. That is, after all, the point. Perhaps God is making that call very clear to you through your wife." The truth is that there are many husbands who are hesitant to follow their wives leading into foster care. And this is really tragic because the need for godly men to step into these children's lives is massive. One national study found that 46% of children involved in the foster care system had not seen their fathers in the last year. Yet study after study suggests that children with involved, loving fathers are significantly more likely to do well in school, to have healthy self-esteem, to exhibit empathy, even to avoid high-risk behaviors like drug use and criminal activity. Foster dads have a unique opportunity to be present and committed to children who need fathering, and in doing so, they can make a significant difference in that child's life. Most of the children I've fostered have moved on from my home, but I am so grateful that at such a crucial and vulnerable time in their life, God allowed me to play a role in making sure that these children knew how much God loved them. To find out how you can make a difference in a child's life, head to fosterthecity.org and sign up to attend an interest meeting today.
Or better yet, come to the table in the lobby. But what about you? How might God be leading you to open your hands in hospitality? For some, again, maybe it is joining the Foster City movement. Come see us at the table. We'll have you fill out that card. I promise you, if you fill out that card, we're not going to send a foster kid off to your house this week. Okay, I swear, all we're going to do is email you, and we're going to invite you to that Zoom interest meeting that's coming up. But for others of you, maybe there's another way that you could extend your hands of hospitality. I actually didn't tell Pastor David or Cindy that I was going to mention this, but I'm going to mention this. Hey, and this is going to sound like a humble brag. Can you bear with me for a minute, okay? Foster the City is inspiring and equipping hundreds of churches now. And we've seen hundreds and hundreds of foster families step forward. And we have seen over 1,500 households wrapped around them, providing consistent, covenant support. We've seen now almost 900 children welcomed into safe and loving homes. And by the week now, that number is just increasing. Child after child after child, experiencing love and stability and safety and compassion. And everything that we do, equipping churches, training families, we've created a mobile app that basically provides a support calendar and communication and prayer and resources. Everything we do at Foster City, we give away for free. We don't charge. There's no cost required for any church that wants to be part of it, or any family. There is not a dime that is required. We give everything away for free. Do you know how we can do that? It's because there are churches like Current that believe deeply in God's vision and concern for vulnerable children, and they have said, hey, we want to support this work financially. We don't require that in anything like that. Current says we want to invest in this, and they, for years and years, as you have given your generosity here at Current, that enables Current to be able to invest in initiatives like Foster the City. There are children in safe and loving homes because of your generosity right here to Current. So maybe one of the best ways that you can extend biblical hospitality, especially listening to Cindy talk about this initiative that's coming up at the end of the year, maybe one of the best ways that you can extend your open hands and biblical hospitality is through your generosity right here to Current. So I want to say thank you, and I want to honor you all for your work already. You're a part of Foster City, whether you knew it or not. You're a part of it. I want to honor you for that. But maybe there's another way that he's calling you to open your hands. That's God's already put a name and a face in your mind. As we've been talking, there's already somebody that he's impressed upon your spirit, somebody who's struggling. It's a friend, it's a family member. It has nothing to do with foster care, but it has everything to do with compassion and hospitality. Who is that person that God is calling you to move towards? A marriage that's falling apart, or somebody, a neighbor that's financially struggling, lost a job. Maybe it's that buddy at school you know is feeling really lonely right now as their family's going through some stuff. How is God leading you to do that? Maybe your next step is, and I'll close with this, maybe it's simply to pray. Maybe it's simply to pray. As we talked a little bit about kind of some of that male malaise, or maybe it's female malaise, maybe just your heart is kind of grown cold a little bit, it's grown a little hard. Maybe one of the best things you can do is just pray and ask God to wake you up. You can't wake yourself up, but He can do it. I love the way Tyler Staton said it. He says, prayer is the furnace that fuels mission. I think he's right. Prayer is the furnace that fuels mission. Maybe one of the best things you can do walking away from this time is just, Holy Spirit, would you just awaken my heart again to the things that matter? I want to be fervent in spirit. I want to be boiling with heat. I want a burning passion for the things that matter to you. If you pray, I believe he'll respond. I think He'll wake you up. There was a moment in time when He did that for me, and I'll close with this final story if you'll indulge me. A couple years ago, when Foster the City turned 7, I got my first ever sabbatical. I'd never had a sabbatical before. I got 4 weeks just for some rest and refreshment. And I was kind of going into that sabbatical, just praying like, Lord, would you really use this time to like revive my spirit, like wake my spirit up again for the things that we're doing at Foster the City? I still cared about kids and families in crisis, but it had been 7 years, and I could just start to kind of sense my heart growing a little bit numb, a little bit apathetic. So I was like, God, would you just use this time to kind of wake me back up? And so we go into this sabbatical. The first 3 weeks were awesome. We went on a trip as a family. I spent some time up in the mountains alone. It was beautiful. And then the 4th week came. It was 5 days before Christmas. And I was at Target with my sons. We were just doing some last-minute Christmas shopping. We were standing in line, and my wife calls, and I pick up the phone, and she's screaming, Phillip, the house is on fire. And so we race back home, and sure enough, there are 4 fire trucks outside of our home, and we lost almost everything, and it took us 10 months until we were able to go back home. That night, the night of the fire, after the fire trucks had driven off, we went to a hotel. And I told my wife, I was like, hey, listen, why don't you pack the kids up in the van tomorrow, drive up to go be with my folks up in Oregon. I'll stay back, kind of get things rolling with insurance, and then I'll fly up in a few days, and I'll join you, and we'll be together for Christmas. She said, great idea. What a kind and thoughtful husband you are. And then, I'm joking. But she did. She packed the kids up, drove up the next day. I stayed back. A few days go by. It's Christmas Eve. And maybe you remember this, these historic storms come rolling through California. And there's like a record amount of flights that were canceled. My flight was one of those. And so it's Christmas Eve. And there's no way, there's no way that I can get up to be with my family for the holidays. So I'm sitting in a hotel room, and everything I have is gone. The people I love most in the world were gone. Couldn't get to them. And I was just sitting there, and I was deeply sad, scared, honestly, about what the future was going to hold, how am I going to navigate this situation. I was deeply lonely. It was one of the saddest, honestly, moments of my life. And as I was praying in the hotel room, I remember God, I distinctly remember God impressing upon my spirit, Phillip, I don't want you to look on the bright side. Which I didn't understand at the time, but I felt really strongly, God is telling me, do not look on the bright. Don't give me your silver linings. Don't give me your, well, at least everybody made it out okay. Just acknowledge, this is really hard. Just acknowledge the pain, acknowledge the grief. So when people would reach out, Phillip, how are you doing? I would just be honest and say, it's really hard. I'm really sad, honestly. I didn't understand it, but it was weeks later when I was kind of reflecting on that season when I think maybe something that God might have been doing in that moment. Because bear with me here, but in a moment, because of trauma, I were removed from my home. And the people that I love most in all the world were gone. There's no way I could get back to them. All of my stuff was gone. I was scared. I was lonely. I was sad. And I realized what hit me is that every single day in our community, there are children that are experiencing the very same thing. Because of some trauma, they're being removed from their home, and they're removed from their family, removed from all other things, and everything that feels safe and comfortable and secure. And they're experiencing this deep sadness and deep loneliness. Now, I hesitate in making a comparison. What I experience is nothing compared to what these kids experience. I was back with my family in a few weeks. We're back in our home now. Everything's just fine. But I think for a moment, God answered my prayer. And he gave me a glimpse. He gave me just a taste of what these children are experiencing. Like he woke my spirit back up as I was able to just empathize just for a fleeting moment about the sadness and the loneliness and what these kids are going through. He answered my prayer. And by the way, do you know what I did that day, Christmas Eve, when I was by myself? I went to church. I actually went to 3 different Christmas Eve services. I went from church to church to church because I needed to be in a place where I knew that people loved me. And I needed to be in a place where I could worship and where I could be reminded that there is a God that moves towards us when things are hard. When kids come into foster care, they're not going to go to the church like I did that day, but the church can go to them. The church can move to them. And current, that's what you're doing. That's what Foster the City is doing. So I want to honor you for that. Please don't get it twisted. God didn't set my house on fire. Can I name that? And I'm not saying that he's going to set your house on fire either, but I will say that he wants to set you on fire. He wants to wake each one of us, myself included. He wants to wake us up to the things that he cares about. He wants to soften our heart. He wants to set our spirit on fire. To give us a burning, it may not be in the world of foster care, but for the things that he cares about, he wants you to have a burning passion. He wants us to be a people with open hands, soft hearts, and hard feet. Would you pray with me? God, I thank you so much for this community. I thank you for all that you've done through Current over the years. God, it's so fun to just see all the ways that it's growing, not just in its numbers, but also in its impact. And God, I just pray for more. God, we want to be greedy and just say, God, give us more opportunities to serve others in your name. God, I pray for just a refreshment of the gospel, God, that we would see that this really is just paying it forward. We're just operating out of an overflow of what you've done for us. Thank you for sending Jesus to us that we might have family and experience your hospitality and compassion. May we do the same for those around us. We love you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Can we put our hands together thanking God for Phillip, for his wife Jessica, for the wonderful team at Foster the City. It's really just a humble privilege to sit in this with you, hear your heart, Phillip, and more importantly, hear the Lord's heart through you.